بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Ibn al-Akhdari goes on to mention the next section of his mukhtasar called Fasl fi Shurut as-Salah, which means the conditions related to prayer. In this section, Al-Akhdari is going to mention the conditions that are necessary to be met in order for a person's prayer to be accepted, or in order for the person's prayer to be valid. So in terms of shurut here, we call these shurut as-sihha, and shurut as-sihha means the conditions that have to be present, or the conditions that have to be met in order for the prayer to be considered valid. So Al-Akhdari says, وَشُرُوتُ الصَّلَاةِ طَهَارَةُ حَدَثٍ وَطَهَارَةُ خَبَثٍ مِنَ الْبَدَنِ وَالثَّوْبِ وَالْمَكَانِ. The first one that he mentions is taharatul hadath, meaning that a person has to be, if a person is in the state of non-wudu, then one of the conditions of the soundness of the prayer is that a person has to have wudu while performing the prayer. Or the other form of hadath is hadath al-akbar, which is the state of janaba. If a person is in the state of janaba, then he's obligated to make ghusl before he prays, and it's one of the being in the state of purity is one of the conditions for the soundness of the prayer. The second one he mentions is what taharatul khabath min al badani wa thawbi wal makani. Also know that it is also a condition that a person is pure from having has to be purified from any physical impurities that are located on his body, his clothing, or his place of prayer. So, meaning that if a person wants to pray, then he has to make sure that his clothes are free from having any type of impurity, as well as his body, and in terms of the place he is praying. And what we mean by the place he's praying is the limbs that are the parts, are the areas in which his limbs will touch. So for example, if a person is praying in an area, then if he's praying on the najis, or the impurity with his body, then we'll say that the area in which he's praying is not pure, and therefore his prayer becomes nullified because he's praying on his prayer is not sound because he's praying on an impurity. But if, for example, the person is praying over top of an impurity but his body's not touching it, for example, when he makes sajda, the chest area under him, where the floor has blood on it, for example, it has urine with feces, then here we don't consider that because of the fact that it's not touching his limb. So when we say that the place of prayer has to be clean, has to be free from impurities, we mean the place in which his limbs touch during the time that he's praying. So that's the second one, what we said is taharat al-khabath min al-badani wa thawbi wal makan, to be pure from physical impurities. That's the meaning of khabath, physical impurities from the three places. And then the next one is satr al-awra, covering the awra of the body. And that is also a condition for the prayer. If the body is, if it's not covered in the prayer, then the person's prayer is not valid. We'll come back to satr al-awra because Al-Akhdari in the next few lines he's going to tell you what the awra of a rajul, of a person, of a male is, and the awra of a female. And when we say satr al-awra, awra means the nakedness of a woman. the nakedness of a woman or the nakedness of a female. So satr al-awra means the obligation to cover what is considered nakedness in terms of what is related to prayer. So that's the third one. Then the fourth one he's going to say wastiqbal al-qiblati, facing the qibla. And facing the qibla is another condition which can be split into two categories. Facing the qibla for those who are living in Mecca, and facing the qibla for those who are living outside of Mecca. In terms of those who are living inside of Mecca, they have to be praying in the direction directly in line with the Kaaba. Whereas those who are praying outside of Mecca, they are only obligated to pray in the direction of the Kaaba in at least a 90-degree angle. So as long as a person is within the direction of the Qibla, within a 90-degree angle outside of Mecca, then his prayer is sound. As for those who are in Mecca, they have to make sure that they are facing directly the direction, so that if we were to draw a line, the line between them and the Kaaba would hit right on. Whereas, as mentioned before, those living outside of Mecca are only responsible for facing the Qibla within a 90-degree angle. So that's wastiqbal al-qiblati, facing the direction of the Qibla. Then Al-Akhdari is going to add two more by saying watarkul kalam, and to stop speaking. So one of the conditions of the prayer is that a person does not speak, meaning that he does not speak in matters that are not related to the prayer. And the sixth one, he says watarkul af'al al-kathira, leaving excessive movement. And according to the Maliki method, we say that excessive movement is enough movement that if the person was to look at him, he would think that he's not moving. So in reality, that issue is arguable in the sense that what exactly defines excessive movement, a person will just have to determine that whether if a person was to look at him from a distance, he wouldn't consider that that person is praying. And in reality, although Al-Akhdari counts to stop talking and a non-excessive movement as one of the conditions of prayer, they really belong to the matters that nullify prayer, the things that invalidate prayer. So these two last ones should be added in the section talking about the matters that nullify prayer, but for some reason Al-Akhdari mentioned them here, maybe for some particular reason that was a matter of interest in his time. But speaking and excessive movement are to be mentioned in the chapter of things that nullify prayer. So these are the 6 things that Al-Akhdari mentions about the conditions of prayer, the conditions of the soundness of prayer, for the soundness of prayer. And then at the end, he mentions what is the awra of both the male and the female by saying وَعَوْرَةُ الرَّجُلِ مَا بَيْنَ السُّرَّةِ إِلَى الرُّكْبَةِ, yani that the awra of a man in terms of prayer is what is between his navel and his knees. So whatever is between his navel and his knees is what has to be covered in order for his prayer to be sound, which means that if a person were to pray with his navel and his knees covered, that would be sufficient enough for him to pray, and his prayer would be considered sound. As for وَالْمَرْأَةُ كُلُّهَا عَوْرَةٌ مَا عَدَى الْوَجْهِ وَالْكَفَّيْنِ, and in terms of prayer, the awra of a woman is everything except her face and her hands. So in terms of a woman covering her awra in prayer, everything of a woman is considered awra except her hands and her face. So in terms of a woman praying, she must cover everything except her hands and her face.